To whom much is given, much is required. Part of that requirement is sharing. Culture is the heartbeat within our lives, and it's at the core of so many things. While we live in a time when we are starving for wisdom, I welcome you to your wisdom retreat at Culture Raises Us. So today, ladies and gentlemen, I have my good friend, James Brown, a.k.a. JB, who will join us today. He's a very, very well-seasoned wealth management advisor whose primary goal is to help clients build and protect generational wealth. Before I have him walk us through his background and how he can share insight on financial wellness, I want to get your thoughts on when you hear culture, what does that mean to you?
Man, I love that question every time that I listen to your podcast and people give different answers, right? So for me, and I don't know if you know where I grew up. I live in D.C. now, and I've been here for the past 27 years, right?
Correct.
And I came to D.C. to go to Howard University, okay? So I came from a town that has less people than Howard University has students.
Wow. Okay.
So the town that, and I actually looked this up today because I was curious. So I came from a town, Smithfield, Virginia, right? The population of Smithfield, Virginia now is 8,900 people.
Now,
in 1996, it was 5,357 people.
So it's almost doubled essentially.
Yeah, but at the time, so at Howard, the enrollment is like 8,900.
Right.
That's 8,900 Black people.
Right.
We're talking about 5,300 people.
Total.
Right? So when I think about culture and what it means, I think of the traditions, the experiences, the celebrations, the traumas, everything we've endured as a people that we've been able to build upon and really succeed and build a foundation for our children, their children, the things that make us unique. Coming from Smithfield, I had some exposure to culture through my parents, right? My mother, she loved the theater. She would go to New York every year, a bus trip with her and her girlfriends to go to Broadway. My dad was a Howard alum, so he took me up to Howard University every homecoming. And my sister lived in Washington, D.C., so I had exposure there. But professionally, right, when I look at who I was exposed to, my dad was an engineer. My mother was a Spanish teacher. But you didn't really see that many Black professionals, right? I didn't know any Black dentists. I knew a couple of Black physicians that my parents knew that did not live in Smithfield, that lived in Hampton or Norfolk. But it was limited, right? So when I came to D.C. to go to Howard, I was good in math, I was good in science, and I chose engineering because it's what I had been exposed to. So my dad, I saw him as being successful, and, I figured I'd follow his footsteps.
Right.
That lasted a semester after I took chemistry. And I decided, hey, this is not the track. And at that time, I got exposed to the discipline, if you will, of business, right? The study of business. Didn't really have that much knowledge of the different disciplines, for lack of better words, in that field. For example, finance, accounting, marketing, general business management, hospitality management, all the things that come under the umbrella of a business major, right? But my friends were majoring in it. I started talking, and I learned more about finance, learned more about investments. I decided that's where I wanted to go. And that's how I ended up eventually coming back to the career of a wealth manager.
So, what's so great about this is how asking the question immediately morphed into you speaking to your upbringing to show just how much culture has played a role in shaping who you are as an individual, and now your ability to help shape and mold culture, especially within this financial realm. And as I look at you as an African-American, finance industry advisor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you believe it's so important to prioritize financial literacy in marginalized communities?
Because I think, so it's important to to educate around financial literacy, financial empowerment in our communities, marginalized or not, because if we don't, those won't be our communities much longer.
Speak on that.
So think about it. It's funny. Before I got on the podcast, I have a friend who is looking to buy a home in our neighborhood, right?
Okay.
And he went to go visit a home. I think the offer price might have been $2 million.
Okay.
Went to go visit the home. An hour later, somebody made an all cash offer on this home, and it was off the market. Had been on the market for a day.
Okay.
Right. And so, I jokingly asked the question, like, who has the cash to make, a $2 million off? Because this is not uncommon in DC.
Right.
You hear about people making all cash offers. And his response was, not us, and it's a hard but sad truth, right? Like, economically, we are behind several generations from our counterparts.
Okay.
And I say that because when you look at the legacy that others were able to build financially, because they had, one, the assets to do so, right? So other cultures who have been more financially empowered, who were not oppressed, right? In the 1800s, to be specific, right? They had farms that we were working on, right? Those farms were sold for millions of dollars. And I'm just giving an example right
now. No, absolutely. Please.
And, while those types of transactions are going on and that type of wealth is being passed, we're looking for basic human rights.
Right. Let alone financial advancement.
We're trying to get educated. We're trying to fight for the right to read.
Right. Jeez.
Like, things like that are happening, and those have real consequences.
Yep.
Right? So when you think about things like the crack era, when you think about gangs and how they came to be, right? Gangs weren't created for the purpose of selling drugs within the Black community. They were created to protect our community. So things like Tulsa wouldn't happen everywhere.
That's right.
But then different things happen, drugs infiltrate our community, families get broken up, it becomes the norm to have a fractured family. All those things have lasting effects,
Yeah.
And I don't want to necessarily get on that soapbox, but it's a real thing.
It's a real thing.
Right?
It's a real thing.
Yeah. And so when I look at, like, our communities, especially those that, Black families have been a part of for several generations, and, and other families move into our neighborhoods, quite honestly, because they can't afford other neighborhoods. Right. And they move in, but they have the inheritances that we don't have. So when they come in and they buy, grandma's house, they'll throw another $200,000 into it and make it look something other than what
we remember it being.
Yeah. And, because they're making it into something for themselves, which they have the right to do. The downside is that, not all of our people, but a lot of our people don't know how to properly transition those assets.
That's right.
So when I think of wealth management, it's bigger than just a discussion around investments and rates of return and things like that. It's estate planning. It's legacy planning. I like to say that, I work intentionally within our community, right? So when you look at the makeup of my client base, it's Black business owners, it's Black executives, it's Black lobbyists, Black entertainers, those that are high income, but not necessarily high net worth. Because there is a big difference between being high income and high net worth, right? And high net worth translates or can transition into generational wealth. And that's something that I'm not going to say we're all lacking within our community, but majority of us are lacking, right?
Yeah.
Think about it. Like, how many people that that may have died and then left someone $500,000 or $1 million?
I'd be lucky if I said it would be 5 people, if I even knew that.
Right. So think about that. That's something that's real,
Yeah.
And when you leave, what you don't want to happen is when we pass or we expire, instead of leaving our children, our kids, a foundation to build upon, we're leaving them in the red.
In the red. Yeah, there's so much that you said there that was very empowering, and the reality of the uphill battle that we are still persevering through, right? And I think another element of that is opportunities to share the information that we do have so that we can propel not only ourselves, but also others. So when you talk about, the example that you mentioned about somebody coming in the neighborhood for that $2.2 million home cash, right? There's a sharing, and I just heard this the other day, like one of the cheat codes apparently with the wealthy or those who have the funds and the assets, apparently, and please help correct me if I'm wrong here. I was told that people get lines of credits based off of their assets.
Absolutely.
They use that line of credit to acquire this home because they get that cash, the big cash you're talking about, because they too are not sitting on $2 million, right? They just know the system, and they're working the system that we don't get access to. So it's about sharing that access, right? So they get this line of credit, they get the $2 million, they get this house, then they turn this line of credit into a mortgage. That process, I don't know how that works, but this is how a number of people are doing it. So I say that as an example of, this is about sharing what we know so that others can benefit. We now have access to certain things and certain conversations that we need to share this so more can do this, and there could be more occupancy of these type of homes, right?
Yep.
Or more space that can be filled by a more diverse audience.
And so you know what the one thing that you left out about that hack?
What?
That benefits these people tremendously?
Is?
Guess what? If you have that line of credit, you know what you're not doing?
What?
Paying taxes on it. So think about it. Like if you have $2 million in an investment account, right? And you may not have started off with $2 million. You might start off with $1 million, $1.5 million, or build it up over time, right? And when I say start off, I don't mean you just took a lump sum of cash. You might be an executive that gets bonuses.
That's right.
Be it stock or whatever that may be, stock, cash, and then over time, the power of compounding interest, right? That builds up and it's a real thing. So before you know it, you have $1 million, $2 million in stock, securities, etc. And like you said, there are banks that will give you a line of credit against those securities. Now, here's the question, right? What's the best way to finance a purchase like that? You may say, why would I take out a line of credit? Because if I take out a line of credit, there's interest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a financial product, right? I have this money. Why don't I just liquidate my investments and then use the cash from that to purchase the home? Well, because there's a couple of costs involved. One, capital gains, so your taxes. If you have $2 million of assets, and like let's say you contributed 1.5 towards that 2 million, and the other 2 million is just what the money grew to, right? Well, that 500K of growth is going to be taxable.
Right.
Also, opportunity cost of liquidation, meaning that if you had 1.5 that grew to 2, why not let it sit in there and grow to 2.5?
That part.
Or 3 million, right? Because guess what? When you die and your kids, your daughters inherit that money, right? There's a thing called a step up in basis. What that step up in basis means is that the value of those securities at the time of your death, and I'm not talking about 401k, that's a different conversation. I'm talking about investments.
That's right.
Real estate, right? Artwork, things like that. The value at your time of death becomes the new basis for which taxes are done, or taxes are charged. Meaning,
wow,
at the time of death, if that has grown to 3 million, the new basis is $3 million. So anything above 3 million that it grows to is taxable. But if they want to liquidate it right then and there, there's no tax on that 3 million.
Oh, that's beautiful. Listen, I didn't even know that. And this is why this is so critical. And one of the things I think is a critical component of this is the presence of Black wealth advisors in general. So talk about the lack of presence of Black wealth management, advisors, and the effect that has on Black communities and their ability to even get access to these types of resources and knowledge especially when not seeing many of us in it.
Right. And I'll speak to that from a few different angles, right? So let's look at it from the standpoint of, let's exclude the 2%, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's exclude them, right? And then let's exclude also attorneys, physicians, C-suite executives, because there's some positions that we hold, black or white or Asian or Latino. If you have that title, people assume you have a lot of money. They know you make a lot of money. They don't know if you have a lot of money, but they know at least you make a lot of money.
Make a lot of money.
Right? So they will call on you. Advisors will call on you, be it black advisors, white advisors, whomever. They look up, doctors, orthopedic surgeons. They know that coming out of med school, that person's going to make at least $300,000. It just is what it is. Attorneys working at law firms, as an associate, you may make $166,000 just coming out, fresh out of law. So people know to call those people, right? It's the other professions that it becomes a gray area, right? So like the consultants, the educators that may be high up in their fields,
Yep.
When an advisor starts his business, if they're not working solely in that 2% space, they build up their book. They're not given a book of business. They have to create a book, right? So that makes it hard, especially for us, right? Because you build that book off of what's called your natural market. So what is your natural market? Your natural market is people that you interact with on a regular basis. It could be former classmates from college. It could be former coworkers if you may have left one career to become a financial advisor like I did. It could be family. It could be people you go to church with, etc. Right? And if you think about, when you think about your natural market outside of, say, former coworkers, I know for me, that natural market looked like me. Right? The people I went to school with, I went to HBCU twice. Went to Howard for undergrad, worked for years, and then went back for business school. People I go to church with, I go to a Southern Baptist church.
Right.
My fraternity brothers, I pledged the black fraternity.
Right.
So I say all that to say, if we don't have people that look like us, that reach out to their natural market, then it's a high probability that we may not get reached out to as professionals. Before I became a wealth management advisor, I spent 7 years in consulting. You know how many times a financial advisor reached out to me?
How many?
Once.
Wow.
And it was someone I went to school with.
Right. Only because they knew you.
Yeah, they knew me. Right. And, so it's not to say that, white advisors or whomever don't reach out to black people. That's not necessarily the case. But what I am saying is that the likelihood that we can, reach more people in our community is higher if we have more people that look like us, that have access to this information and are able to disseminate this to our people.
So that you said you have a couple of ways of you want to address that question.
Yeah. So and I addressed it when I talked about like the natural market piece, right?
Gotcha.
The lack of. I remember when I first became a financial advisor 11 years ago, and I went to a conference, for the company I was with at the time. They have it every summer, and it was probably 10,000 advisors who are all licensed with this company, right? Filled up a basketball arena.
Wow.
They had a breakout for the African-American advisors. It was in a hotel bar because there was only 100.
What a picture that just got painted right there.
Right. Now, that's not to knock them, because I think that's more indicative of the industry. I found that out because when I go to industry-wide conferences, right? Like I just said, one company filled up an arena, right? When I go to industry-wide conferences, is inside of a hotel ballroom. Which, and again, I think it's reflective, across professions, across industries, right?
Yep. Yep.
That's why we have organizations like NABA, organizations like National Black MBA Association, national the National Black, the National Bar Association. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
all those organizations for those Black professionals in those industries, because oftentimes we're the only ones in the room.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so yeah, so I'm sorry for going off on a tangent.
No, it's not a tangent. It's all very real stuff, and it gives context as to the challenge to get to the opportunity, right? And the more we paint that out, the more equipped we are to handle.
Right.
And I think in handling it ourselves, the next piece is, okay, well, how are we also now setting up our next generation
Right.
coming up after us, right? So how can we then empower minorities to kind of establish better wealth building habits for future generations? So we speak about all these things, but just like anything else, as you were talking about with other industries, it's being very similar in terms of the population or the representation of minorities within the greater is very small. One of the things with anything, you look at that as sport, professional or personal, is how do you institute, there's certain habits and behaviors that you have to exemplify to be excellent and stable. So what are some that you would recommend that we, at the very least, we can figure out how to set the next generation up for success,
Right.
at least?
That is an excellent question, man. And I will say this, I've seen things change.
Good.
Right. So, like, for example, at one point I was going to speak at Howard University to their freshman business students, right? And I had to change the name of our presentation. Initially it was financial literacy, and the kids were already financially literate. It wasn't a basic conversation. I saw that like very early on as I spoke to the class. So I changed it from financial literacy to like financial readiness.
Okay.
Right? Because they have access to so much information. We have access to so much information. So it becomes a point of prioritizing and filtering out, what things are the basic building blocks. So to your question, what types of things, I look at like what types of habits should we have? And I oftentimes get asked the question, or I hear the statement, well, I don't make enough money to have a financial advisor or a wealth management advisor. And there's different tiers in terms of the titles, but let's just use the word financial advisor for this conversation, right? You don't have to be rich to have a financial advisor.
Thank you. Say that again, man. It's because it could be very intimidating. It's so intimidating for so many to look from the outside and think, well, I got to be making 6-7 digits.
You don't have to be rich. You do need to be responsible.
That's the line. And that's the habit. See, this is what I'm talking about. Share the habits. Responsibility.
Responsibility, living within means, establishing basic saving habits, right? And once you become a good saver, you can become a good investor. So once you learn how to manage your cash flow, look at your household like it's a business, right? And, businesses, if they have a profit margin of 20%, then they're successful, right? So if you could save 20% of your net income into your household, you are doing a great job. And that is the building block right there. I look at it like, if there's an ideal formula for your finances, 20, 60, 20. Saving 20%, 60% going towards your fixed household expenses, and then 20% going towards the fun stuff, discretionary expenses. Now, when I sit down with people, it's rare that they are hitting those metrics. They're all
right.
They may be doing one, and I would say if there's one that's key is keeping those fixed expenses below 60% of your household net income, right?
Right.
So if you're making, just to use a round number, $10,000 a month, right? And you can keep your mortgage, your car note, utilities, things like that below that 60% threshold, below $6,000, you're already ahead of the game because those are the hardest ones to change.
That's right. That's right.
If you're in a mortgage for 30 years and it's above that number, it's hard to change that number. You got to figure out how to make more money.
Right. That's right.
But yeah, that would be one of the foundational things. And then other things that come into play, there's certain things that you should be doing. If you're working for a company, contributing to the 401k, they offer a match, doing at least up to whatever they match you. If you're a business owner, we spend so much time. I own my practice, so you own your business. We spend so much time investing into the business, right?
Mm-hmm.
We got to figure out at what point can we pivot and invest into us. Because as business owners, you remember I said I work primarily with business owners. The options that they have, at their disposal are a lot more than someone who works a W-2.
That's right. Right.
And I think part of it is because, there's probably a realization that people who own businesses, a lot of times they spend a lot of money trying to get that business to where it can be successful. Money that other people can normally be putting into their 529 for their son or daughter, or be putting into their 401k. So the government allows us to have a very high ceiling in terms of what we can put away for things like retirement.
Right. Yeah. No, and thank you for sharing those, what we call habit tools, and hopefully that will help a number of people and enlighten them on even their current situation. Are there initiatives or programs that you're aware of that kind of reinforce this type of what we can call from financial literacy to even readiness that you're talking about, to also complement kind of what you just shared?
There are some that are out there. I recall like Bank of America making that initiative, I think probably 2 years ago, to help more African Americans achieve home ownership, right? But I think beyond what any corporation does, we have to look and really, really do as a community for ourselves, and really be intentional, right? In terms of like, how can we help others? And I think that a lot of it starts with habits. So for a long time, it was very taboo within the Black community to talk about how much money we make or how we manage our finances.
Still awkward.
It's very awkward. Yeah. And it's awkward because there's so much disparity, right? You think about like the circle we have in general, right? We have Black doctors. We may have a Black doctor, or a Black executive, or a Black business owner, or a Black dentist, within our circle. Right. Whereas our counterparts, they have just cohorts of them that they can just hang with together. Like, the other world, doctors hang with doctors, attorneys hang with attorneys. In our world, it's like we're the only ones in those worlds. And there may be a couple that we're friends with, but for the most part, it's a very diverse, eclectic group of people who hang around each other.
Yes.
Everybody's doing something different, which is beautiful because we're all successful. But at the same time, it's like our lanes are very, very different. And I think oftentimes there's a guard in terms of how much we should reveal and how much we should share. But that's the only way we're going to learn, is by sharing what we're doing, who we're talking to, the habits that we have, what we're working on, those types of roundtable discussions, because other people are having it, other cultures are having it.
And have been having it. And that's the power of transparency.
Yeah.
We've been programmed to a degree of thinking that's the ego, that's the better than thou, that's I'm not going to tell people what I got because then crabs in the barrel, they're coming for me. And again, a lot of these things go back to your first comment in walking us through when you think of culture, what that means to you, and the things we've had to persevere through, for hundreds of years, play a role in this. We're still, deprogramming ourselves from these implications, which is so real. But the only way to do that is to kind of be examples and to share that necessary information for all of us to succeed and all to thrive and be best versions of ourselves. And so as I listen to you share these habits, and as I listen to you share, these organizations, the other thing that I would ask are, okay, what kind of financial planning tools or resources can we share that individuals can utilize to become more financially secure? Are there apps? Are there websites? Are there books that you'd say, hey, these are good starting points for people just to get comfortable? Because again, you know what? It's great. Money is uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's an uncomfortable conversation. It's an uncomfortable thing for a number of reasons. It holds so much power, that it could be very daunting.
Absolutely.
Very daunting. So how can we simplify it for people? Do you have tools? Do you have any resources or things that you'd recommend to say, here's a good little starting kit, right? Just to get comfortable.
Right, right. Yeah, man. One website that I really like, and I've liked it for like probably like 10 years now, even before I became into this, again, like I transitioned. I've been a wealth manager for 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
I had a life before that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be it in consulting, working in financial services, different capacity. Even then, one website was called Investopedia.
Like an encyclopedia, old school. Okay.
Yeah, very, and I love it because it's very, it's very, like, the language is very common. It's very easy to flow. It's conversation. It's not
digestible.
digestible. Thank you, brother.
You're very welcome. I'm here for you, bro. I'm here for you,
I
JV. Come on.
appreciate you, man. I appreciate you. But it's very digestible. It's not overly technical. But anything that you see, like what we hear in the news about S&P is this and that, like, what is the S&P? And like,
Right.
do we know there's more investments out there besides that? Right. It gives you a lot of knowledge that if you're in a group chat and people are throwing around terms, go there real quick, figure it out, So that's a good one. I'm trying to think of another tool. On a more technical side, there's websites like Morningstar. So taking a step back, let's talk about the difference between like financial planning versus investment management versus savings, right? There's all these terms that can be used interchangeably, but they have very different meanings, right?
Yep.
So it's very common when I sit with someone who's never worked with a financial advisor. The first question they ask me, oh, you're a financial advisor, well, what's your rate of return? And it's like, that is a very broad question because I just don't deal in investments, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also too, every client that I have doesn't have the same type of, not like I'm managing one thing.
It's not apples to apples.
Yeah. Like I'm very specific to the needs of the people that I work with.
That's right.
So when I sit down, or when a financial advisor sits down with you, and the main thing they should be discussing is what are your goals, right? And once you figure out what your goals are, you can back into what type of plan you should have. Is it a plan where you're just building up savings, like so everything's going in cash? Is it a more sophisticated plan where we're looking at insurance planning, investment management, all those different things, right? So a plan is more comprehensive, whereas when you start talking about like investment management, it's like, all right, we have this pool of money it's going to be used for this thing, right? So what's the best way to get our growth to where it needs to be in the time that we have to invest, meaning our time horizon, so that money's growing in a safe way for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other ways to leverage, like how you just mentioned, like line of credit, big thing that people are doing that, again, it saves you thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes, right? While still making you competitive for those things, like the guy who's trying to buy a house and he's like, well, why, how does this guy have all this cash? You just gave the half away. How he did it.
Right.
And some people may have $2 million in cash, but let's be real. Who has $2 million in cash?
Man, listen.
And I'm not saying who has $2 million, but I'm saying in cash.
Cash, 1,000%.
Because if you have $2 million and you don't have it in cash, that money's not working for you, so you're losing dollars.
That's right.
There is a thing called inflation that we've been hearing about for the past year, 2 years.
And feeling it.
Feeling it, right? That's real. So if money's sitting in cash, it's literally losing value. Literally losing value.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in your opinion, because we're talking, we talked about a ton of things here for that are going to be very, very beneficial. Are there though broader systematic changes that need to occur to ensure financial literacy and kind of wealth building opportunities are more accessible to and equitable for marginalized communities?
Absolutely. It's all about education. You know, there's access to information out there, but access to information, if it's not being accessed, you know, it's not benefiting people, right? So there's a lot of different movements out there, you know, like there's podcasts out there. I like EYL, Earn Your Leisure.
They're great.
Because it gives you an idea, even though it may not give you a step-by-step, you know, booklet, if you will, on what to do. It gives you exposure in terms of like, well, these are things I should be asking about or doing my own research about or learning more
That's
about
right.
and applying for me and my family and applying to me and my family. Right. There's so much that I've learned about over the last 11 years that I just did not know about. You know, when I look at my parents, and both of my parents were college educated professionals, middle class earners, right? But also both of my parents had pensions. So when they retired, you know, when they were working, they didn't need to save into a 401k or save into a brokerage account. You know, they had their retirement set. You know, pensions are rare now.
Very. You don't even hear those anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you hear about from time to time, but very, very rarely, and usually in like the more lucrative fields, right? Like the partners at law firms.
Gotcha.
The partners at consulting firms, the C-suite executives, you know, they may have access to it, right? But for those who are making good money, right? You know, low to mid six figures, it's rare that they have access to that. So they have to build out that savings for themselves, right? And a lot of times people don't know, like the most common question is, well, how much should I be putting away? Or what should I be putting it away into?
Right.
And depending on who you work for, guess what? They may or may not tell you how to do it. You know, I know plenty of people who work for the federal government that are putting their money into what's called a TSP, is like their version of 401k, where the default, if you just put your money in, it goes into cash. It goes into a government bond, right? And when you look at, like, we all heard stories about, like, back in the day, like grandma gave me a savings bond and we used it to pay for college or whatever they may have used it for. Well, the reason why it worked in their favor, because back in the day, back in the 80s, interest rates were really, really high. If your parents owned a house back then, they may have been paying 10, 15% interest on that loan. You know, now interest rates are low. Well, they're not low right now. Like,
right.
Think about 5 years ago, right? Like, think post 2008.
Right.
What did you hear? Not a lot of people had, which was a high yield savings account. And the reason why is because interest rates were low. It's easy to buy homes. You know, interest rates being low is a two-way street. It's easy to get money, like a loan for a home or a loan for a car. When you want to save money in something safe, interest rates are low for you too. Right? So if you have your money in low interest rate and low interest yielding accounts, it's harder for that money to grow. So without the right types of education around these types of things, you know, yeah, you may have access to these tools, but are you really maximizing?
Yeah. And so when I look at Black culture in general, as we know it, it's obviously often borrowed, appropriated, or used to kind of inspire other cultures and industries. Talk about the importance of Black ownership and recognition of what it is that the Black community kind of has brought to not only the country but the world. I'd love to get your perspective from your financial, space on this.
So when I hear that, I think of, the failure rate of the transfer of businesses from one generation to the next. Right? And then I also think of from a proportion standpoint of Black business owners to other cultures, right? The number is lower than what it is in those respective cultures, right? And if the number is lower, meaning if there's 10 white business owners to 2 Black business owners, right? And of those 10 white business owners, they transition to the next generation, they want to keep it in their family, etc. Say 4 of those business thrive. We got 2 over here. Mm-hmm. It's like a half of one that thrives.
That's right.
So, when I think of culturally, like how things get exploited, etc. There's nothing wrong with having what's called a liquidity event, right? Meaning that you build up a business and you sell it. That's one of the purposes for it, right? But how is that money being reinvested in our community? What are you doing? Right. What's the next thing, right?
Right.
I think for a long time, one of the biggest things that we inherited as a people, if we did inherit anything, was land. A land or a home, right? And so you always used to hear, well, don't you sell that home? Don't you sell that land, etc. I agree with it, but at the same time, if you can use that to build something bigger.
That's right. That's right.
Don't sell that land and buy a Range Rover, but sell that land and buy a building.
Right.
Buy another home.
Multiply.
Right? Exactly. Or if you inherit that home and it has all that equity in it, just like we talked about, like a line of credit against your investments or against other assets you may have, guess what? You can get a line of credit against that home too. And you can use that to buy more homes or buy into a business. There's many uses of what we already have at our disposal that we just got to be intentional about doing, about leveraging.
And that's the word, intentional. Yeah. The intentional piece is so critical because it has such a big impact on the next generation. I think everything we're doing here and we're talking about is not only an effort for right now, but how are we making for a better situation for the next generation, right? And we know it's not going to get easier. Yeah. Nothing gets easier. It's our job to handle harder better. Right? And so how do we provide the tools to handle hard better for the next generation? And I think you've shared a great deal of these nuggets. And before I ask you, we always end with, we make the analogy to farming on this show a lot, of planting seeds and watering the seeds. And I'm going to love to get what 3 seeds you would share with the stewards of culture moving forward. But before that, another question I'd like to ask, because we obviously have a music affinity. And if your documentary was being made and it's the opening scene of your life documentary, what song is playing and why, my friend?
Oh man, you could have given me that one ahead of time, brother.
Yeah, come on. No way.
No. All right, what song is playing?
Of your life documentary. It's about to begin. What song comes on and why?
Man, so I'm a big Jay-Z fan.
Okay.
So man, it's either, you don't know. It's either what more can I say?
Okay.
It's so many stories, it's so many songs where he talks about he really predicted where he was going to go.
He manifested. And
I'm a believer of the energy you put out is what you get. Right?
That's right.
So, I still have a ways to go in my journey, but I have a vision of where I want to be and what I want to do and who I want to impact. Right. And, I'm very, very, the word I'm looking for. Man, I lost my
purposeful.
Purposeful, yes, but it's also not emotional, but enthusiastic
Mm-hmm.
about my purpose, right?
Nice.
And that purpose, I believe, is really to help, you know, my friends, my family, my friends of friends, those in my circle, in my community, right? To generate wealth.
That's right.
I love what I do. I generating wealth for my family, but I don't want to do it by myself.
That's right.
I want to
That's right.
be able to do that for others too,
That's right.
right? And really change the narrative that's within our community and build on what's already been done.
Yeah.
Um, that is my view, man. That's where, when you start talking about manifestation, that's where I'm going with that, right?
Yeah, but you know what? You're also a child of God who is allowing Him to utilize you as a vessel of purpose,
Yeah.
and you're utilizing the gifts that He's given you to help those who need it. So you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, which is beautiful to see and support. So with that, what are the 3 C's you'd want to leave with the stewards of culture moving forward? If there are 3 things.
Yeah. So I would say to steward is a good word. You need to be a steward of your finances.
Mm.
Right? So it starts there. So, being intentional with who you surround yourself with.
Yep.
There's a saying that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Yep.
Right? And I don't mean that necessarily from a monetary, it applies from a monetary standpoint, but also to spiritually, and habits, right? And things you do, right? Everybody can't necessarily come with you everywhere.
That part.
Right? Because that energy that they exude out feeds into you. So, being intentional with that. So being intentional with who you surround yourself with, being intentional where your dollars go.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So how I talked about, minding your finances so that we don't cross certain thresholds, right? In terms of where your money's being spent and, reinvesting in yourself and your family.
Mm.
So, putting money away for those things, like if you struggle with college debt, coming out of college. So I look at every milestone in my life as a teachable moment.
It is. You're a work in progress. I love it. Yeah.
Right. So the things that I did when I first graduated from undergrad and, I did an inventory maybe a year or 2 after I graduated and looked at some things that needed to change. And when I went back to business school and I finished business school, I moved different, right?
Mm-hmm.
I moved differently, right? I was more intentional about the way I studied in grad school versus undergrad. I was more intentional about like my activities, being active, things like that. When I left consulting to go to financial, wealth management, I was really intentional. I was really retrospective of how I managed my finances up until that point. Said, hey, if I'm going to be doing this way, then I had to be reflective of that too myself.
That's right.
And things like, the investments I make, not only in the market, but also in real estate and things like that. Just being really intentional, man. Being retrospective to the point where like, all right, this is how I moved for the past 7 or 8 years, for better or for worse, right? So how do we build upon this in a positive way? So I would say just, third C of just having the ability to be retrospective. And it's okay to look back if with the intention of being better when you look forward.
That's right. Well, I can't thank you enough for being a reflection of these things and harping on also the power of being intentional and the journey of what that intentional looks like, right? It got different at every stage of your life, and I'm so glad you shared that. And JB, I can't thank you enough for what you're doing. I thank you for coming on and sharing, because one of the big, we start the show with "To whom much is given, much is required." And by you providing this type of insight, it's a huge part of you've been given a lot. And I'm very thankful that you are sharing a lot.
Hey, I appreciate the opportunity to share with you, brother, man. It's I've been watching what you've been doing. We've been friends for the past few years. I've been watching you build this up. So I'm honored to be a part of it.
Thank you, bro. We truly appreciate your support because it helps us fulfill our mission of promoting cultural awareness and personal development. Please click the subscribe button below to help ensure and solidify our mission.